Welcome to the Tech Woke channel. I am Chris. I am an RMF specialist that works in the federal government, and I have a lot of experience working in risk management framework as an ISO. They have different names for it. You can call it ISO, you can call it RMF specialist, different names for IA specialist, but currently I work in that role. I've been working in that role for over 5 years, and I keep getting the same question all the time. What are some of the interview questions for RMF? So, you know what? I decided just to make a video for it, just going specifically on what some questions that some people can ask when trying to get into RMF. And just so the audience to know, if you want to get more information like this, join my school community, or you can reach out to me for specifically consultations on how to become an RMS specialist or resume help or just career coaching in general. So remember to check that out. But we're going to go into that. How do you become an RMS specialist? Not specifically, but we're going to go into the questions that they're going to ask you so people can be sharp on what they might ask you when getting into this role. So I'm going to share my screen in a couple seconds, just so I can show you what it would look like if somebody's going to ask you questions for an interview. And I know this from doing the role for a while. I kind of got a feel of what questions they may ask, or questions even if I was interviewing, what they may ask. So I'm going to share my screen right now. So I have my screen up. So I'm going to go to my Word document. So I titled this document RMF questions. And these are questions that they might ask you in an interview. So we're going to go into the first question. This is the questions they ask you for specifically RMF. Interview question: what is a POAM and why is it important in cybersecurity? So, off the break, a plan of action and milestone is something that you create when you have a vulnerability that you cannot remediate, or you have an assessment and an assessor goes in to say that you failed these controls and he might leave certain things up to remediate. He might say you need to create a POAM to help remediate this in overtime. So I'm going to look at this, what I wrote out for here, so you can get a better understanding. So, what is a POAM and why is it important in cybersecurity? A plan of action and milestone POAM is a document used to track managed security vulnerabilities that cannot be remediated immediately. It serves as a structured plan of document to issue outline steps to mitigation, establish timeline, resolution. POAMs are commonly tracked in the system like EMAS. There can be various systems like Exacta. There's a lot of different systems you can use to track it. Or some people track them using Excel. So that's different things people can use. POAMs are typically created for a security assessment when vulnerabilities are identified. If an assessor determines certain security controls have failed, these findings are documented in the assessor report, prompting the creation of POAMs. Each POAM includes key details, and you have to have these findings when you create a POAM, like finding vulnerability descriptions. Basically, it's describing what the finding is, gives an understanding of what it is. For example, RHEL can have specifically Red Hat can have a patch, describes what type of patch is needed, what description is needed. There are things like that so they can know what's going on. Start date, when it started, when you complete it. Milestones are things you take in place to remediate a vulnerability. Just different steps. It can be, hey, I need to reach out to this system administrator. Hey, after I reach out to them every week, I will probably reach out to them every week so I can figure out if this vulnerability was fixed. And the last one can probably be close out vulnerability. Point of contact POC. POCs needs to be on there too. Is the individual responsible for tracking and managing the POAM. Mitigation strategy is basically mitigations that are in place to reduce the risk of the vulnerability. And a risk assessment is just something, an evaluation of potential impact of vulnerabilities if left unaddressed. So these are things that are put into POAM so you can understand what they are and what's going on with it. So if somebody, if they're reading it, they can understand. As an RML special or ISO, it is critical to ensure the POAMs are properly documented, updated, and tracked until the vulnerabilities are fully mitigated. Yeah. This maintains compliance, strength, security posture, and reduce risk to organization. Yeah, as an ISO, your job is to help remediate and mitigate vulnerabilities and reduce risk. So tracking POAMs is highly important just to make sure things are being addressed. It could be a 0 day, a vulnerability that's unknown, or vulnerability so everybody can know what's going on in case you're out and somebody needs to take over, or so the organization, PMO, managers can make sure that they know what's going on so it's properly tracked, and so the whole program can know what's going on. So a POAM is highly important, but they're definitely going to ask you what a POAM is. For any of these questions, I don't recommend anybody lying. If you don't know what a POAM is, there's projects you can do to understand what it is, but if you never work with them, they're definitely going to make sure you know all these details with a POAM. So just make sure you understand what a POAM is. And if you can't speak to it, just be honest. But if you can speak to these things, that is a good sign to make sure you did your own research, because working in this field, you got to do your own research and be self-motivated. So that's a good answer to what are POAMs. Okay. What tools do you use to manage POAMs? So, in different organizations, they do different things. I know EMAS is a common tool used in the government. Also, some organizations that don't have systems in place, sometimes they can't afford it. They would use Excel. So Excel is another place where people can track POAMs, but it's not used as common, but some organizations use them. There's also different services that can use it, different systems that you can use it. So in the federal space, EMAS, Enterprise Mission Assurance Support Service, is the primary tool used to create POAMs and track them. Um, that primarily use RMF. EMAS allows organizations to track vulnerabilities, document mitigations, and responsible ensure compliance with security requirements to maintain authority to operate. And this ATO is basically accreditation. And basically, in addition, there are other tools commonly used for POAMs. For example, Exacta is one use, Archer, RSA. Archer is another one, ServiceNow, SISM, and there's other tools. And again, you can use Excel, but EMAS is a common tool that is used in the federal space. And these are different tools that you can use. Again, if you haven't used them, you haven't used them, but just be aware of them and be aware that they need to be tracked. And they have to be tracked somewhere. But this is just for awareness. This question definitely comes up because they're going to ask you what tools you use, and do not lie on anything you say. So another interview question is, how do you ensure POAMs are not delayed? So POAMs are going to get delayed. It happens a lot. A lot of POAMs you have to always reach out and make sure what's going on. But we're going to go into what I wrote in here so you can keep up with what was going on. So how do you ensure that POAMs are not delayed? To ensure that a plan of action and milestone stays on track and is not delayed, proactive communication, diligent tracking are essential, which is 100% true. You need to make sure you're keeping all the stakeholders in contact, managers, and everybody, to make sure you're doing your best to get it remediated. Regular communication with stakeholders or people that has a stake in the program, just giving them reminders, providing reminders at least 2 weeks before the deadline or continuously throughout the process. Monitor progress and follow up. Make sure you're reaching out to the people that you need to reach out to get the vulnerability fixed. If it's a vulnerability or documentation, need information, just make sure it's being tracked. Engage with the project team and leadership. Make sure that the project managers know what's going on so they won't get surprised, and just make sure it's helping you protect yourself. And you use compliant tools like Exacta, EMAS, Archer, the one service now that we talked about, to help keep a track on it and make sure you're going on, because they usually give you reminders. And identify and address roadblocks early. So a lot of the problems is for ISOs, sometimes we just don't talk about what's going on. So we're not saying, hey, we have delays, or hey, there's no patch, or hey, there's not going. So you got to make sure this is going. This is a question they definitely will ask during the process, but make sure, again, you're reading this to make sure you need to know these things. So So they may ask you also in an interview, how do you close out a poem? So basically, you're closing out a poem once you went through all the milestones, and you're basically at the point where you can close it to fix that. Or sometimes when your assessor goes through a package, you might give you certain milestones that could close out certain poems also. So it gives you certain steps, and you have to follow them to close them out. To close them out, you close them out usually in a system like EMAS. I keep referring to it, or maybe you might track it in Excel. So we're going to read what I wrote. Review the assessor's findings if the POAMs originated from a security reviews statement. Ensure that all the vulnerabilities are addressed. Verify mitigation and action. Ensure all corrective actions are done. Validate with the supporting evidence. Update the compliance tool like EMAS. Request assessor or ISM approval, and ensure the audit readiness even after closure. So just even after closure, just make sure is being maintained. And that's another thing that is crucial with being an ISO. You got to make sure you're closing out these things once they happen. Sometimes you can't close them out. Sometimes you might have the risk assessment depending on the program. Risk assess. I'm sorry. Yeah. So like risk, risk accept. I'm sorry. I keep saying a risk assess. So sometimes you might have to risk accept something. So that's what's going on. Okay. What are the different impact levels for a poem? There's different ones. Usually is medium, high, low. I'm sorry, high, medium, low. It can be different for every organization. It may be sometimes it might be critical, but usually high, medium, low is the standard, depending, but that's usually the standard. So it just depends. Like it's different frameworks. You know, STIGs have different, ACAS have different vulnerability impact level. So it just depends. It just depends on what's going on with that system. Let me read what I wrote. The impact level of a plan of action is determined by the severity of the vulnerability potential risks poses to the system organizations. POAMs generally categorized into different impact levels and organizational management policies, security frameworks like NIST, DoD, STIGs. So, for example, high critical impact vulnerabilities that pose severe risk to the system, if as unpatched critical security flaws, misconfigurations that can lead to unauthorized access or weakness that can result in breach, compromise, and require immediate remediation. Okay. Also, moderate issues that present potentially security risks that are less likely to exploit systems. And these will include missing security controls, outdated configurations, or vulnerabilities that require additional conditions to be exploited. These are needed to address reasonable time frame based on organization risk tolerance. And low minor vulnerabilities do not pose the immediate or significant threat. It should be tracked and remediated to security posture. Examples include minor documentation, non-critical patches, or minor misconfigurations that do not impact directly. So that's kind of some of them. Sometimes it can be critical, medium, low, low, moderate, high, like I was talking about, but it's different. And this is outdated. Let me update that. It's revision 5 currently, just so people will know. Okay, so just make sure you know the impact levels when you're doing an interview so they can make sure you know what you're talking about, because this is highly important. Because if you misput the impact level, it can really damage the system. A critical you put to moderate can damage it. It's just so they can know how bad it can be. So sometimes during interviews, they always ask you, and this is what I was when I first started. They always ask you, "Can you tell me the 7 steps of the RMF? The 7 steps of the RMF process based off the NIST guidelines, revision 5." Okay, so it's prepare, categorize, select, implement, assess, authorize, monitor, or continuous monitoring is the last step. So this is something they always ask you. So just make sure you're on top of this. This can be a whole class on its own. I'm not going to go into depth. Maybe another time, maybe in a school community. But here, I'm not going to go into as depth because this can take a whole hour at its own, and you make sure you're doing this correct right when you're doing a system. But most programs are on the continuous monitoring stage. But you just talk about it, maybe talk about how you applied it to a system, maybe what phases have you went through in this process, and just break it down. Some people went through all the steps. Sometimes people only do 2 steps, but just make sure you're able to. And if you don't know, and again, don't lie, just make sure you're able to speak to it. Maybe you never did it, but you can at least know you talked about it. But just don't lie on any question you're doing, because again, this is serious work. And you want to, if you don't know, then they're going to put you in a situation where you're going to be tested. Okay, so this is a question they always ask. What is an authorization to operate? ATO, and how do you obtain it? So ATO is basically accreditation that you got to go through whatever program you are to get accredited for a system. It could be a year, 2 years, 5 years, 7 years. I'm just throwing things out, but that's what a ATO is. The authorization to operate is a formal approval that allows federal information system to operate with an acceptable level of risk. The RMF process includes 7 steps, basically, and that's what it is for that one. So I have, what is the difference between a security control assessment, SCA, and a risk assessment? So usually with a security control assessment, it evaluates the different control. You're testing the control, and that's what it is. You're testing controls to kind of see if it's up to date. What I have here evaluates whether security controls defined are correctly implemented. So that's what you're going on. You're making sure they're correctly implemented. A risk assessment is a broader process that identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes risk based on potential threats, vulnerabilities, and system impact. And it's done through the RMF prepare categorized steps, and it continuously during monitor, guide, and risk based, which is continuous monitoring. So that's what it is. And ignore that. Whoever's watching this and see revision 2, I know. What role does continuous monitoring play in RMF? So, no matter what, you're going to have to continuously, even though you get accreditations and things for the system, you have to continuously monitor a system because things happen. Sometimes people get lazy during a process of when you have been approved for, like, I'm just saying, example, 7 years or something. You might not review or keep doing the same work you're doing because you're not under duress. So you're during the continuous monitoring, you're constantly going through POAMs, you're constantly going to vulnerability scans, you're constantly reviewing security logs, reassessing security show, ensure compliance through the 7 steps. So you're continuously doing that on a basis to maintain the system. It's not okay, I fixed the system, I'm got accredited, not doing anything, but you're continuously doing it on a daily basis to make sure the system's secured. Sometimes they ask you, how do you handle a failed security control? So basically, like when doing a failed security control, all you can really do is go back and assess it. You get the proper documentation, create a POAM, implement remediation, reassess the control, and update security package if it's up there with the ATO. So that's all you can really do for that process. But when you're and I can read it for y'all. If a security control for fails the RMF security, step 5 assess the following actions, document the finding, record the control in the security assessment SAR, create a POAM, implement remediation, apply patch, update security configuration, deploy concentration controls needed, and reassess control, perform follow-up testing was successful, and update the security patch. That's if it was with the AO, but usually you just update the system. Yeah, so those are some good questions. I got to fix some of these, but I made a couple of mistakes. But overall, these are questions they ask for the RMF questions. Let me go back. So overall, I hope these questions help. If you want these questions, join the school community. I'm going to put them there. So anybody wants to check it out, join the school community. But these are some of the questions they ask you in RMF. If you're trying to get a job, you got to make sure you know these things. And I'm going to make more of these type of videos in the future to make sure everybody knows what's going on with this process. But join the school community. Make sure you like the video, make a comment down below. Check out techbookpodcast.com. And you remember, everybody, just get 1% better a day. I hope this video really helped y'all. And I'm going to keep doing it in the future just to make sure we're doing this right. So peace out, everybody. I'll see you on the next one.